Hi there, and welcome to Season 3 of the If You Ask Betty podcast, the podcast about all kinds of development topics for all kinds of learning professionals. I am Betty Danowitz, and this is the I Have Questions About Accessibility series episode, Accessibility, But Why Though? Today, I have with me 4 folks who are passionate about accessibility: Meryl Evans, Eduardo Escalante, Diane Elkins, and Judy Katz. Welcome, friends. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you tell us real quick what you do and why you wanted to be part of this accessibility series?
I'm Diane Elkins. I'm with Artisan eLearning. We do custom e-learning development, and I wanted to be a part of it because accessibility is having a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen more interest, more questions, more conference sessions, more people in conference sessions than I've ever seen. And I want to ride that wave for all it's worth. So anyone who will stand still long enough for me to talk to, I'm a talk.
Awesome. How about you, Judy?
I'm Judy Katz. I work for EduWorks, and I've been in training and development for about 25 years, mostly as an instructional designer, now as a product manager. And accessibility has been a big passion for about 10 years. And primarily now I focus on issues related to neurodivergence. I've been doing a lot of speaking and talking, or speaking and writing about that lately. And that is sort of my niche that I can speak to from my own personal experience and situation. And I'm just thrilled that that's being included in our conversations about accessibility now.
Great. How about you, Meryl?
This is Meryl Evans. I am self-employed at Meryl.net, creative name, right? I am a professional speaker and accessibility marketing consultant. While most of my career has been in marketing, the last 3 years have just grown in accessibility, and I love it. And I even earned my certification in that. So I am here because any opportunity to help spread the message on the value of accessibility to a new audience is always a great one.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. All right, Eduardo.
I work at SweetRush, and about 2 years ago, the company saw that an increase in accessibility requirements in terms of e-learning, and well, I shouldn't say no. Fortunately, at the same time, I had a stroke.
Oh.
And I say fortunately because it's a different. You can see it negatively or you can see it positive. And the stroke for me was one of the best things that's happened to me. It changed
Wow.
my life. It's helped me to a lot of things. I've lost weight. I feel in a much better shape than I am. Just 1 hour before we gone on the call, I went out riding a bicycle for 7 kilometers. So that anyway, so the company asked me if I wanted to lead the accessibility initiative at SweetRush, and I said, "Hell yeah!" I know. I came into a world that I didn't know anything about, but now I'm part of it, a person who has disabilities.
Yeah.
So it's something personal, but also to relate it with SweetRush.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here and for sharing that. I love that you guys are sharing your passion, and it's rubbing off on me. I'll tell you that. I don't know that I'm going to go ride 7 kilometers, but maybe I'll go for a walk later because you've inspired me.
I forgot to, I don't
Oh yeah,
have
go ahead.
you don't mind. I forgot to mention it. You might have your audience might not know this, but I was born profoundly deaf. Well, I prefer to call it hearing free because it sounds more interesting. And so obviously accessibility is important to me because I've lived with a disability my entire life and I've run into barriers and I don't want anyone to run into those barriers. Whenever I hear stories about the barriers people run into, and I'm like, that's not fair.
That's not,
Like
yeah.
yesterday, I heard about a friend of mine, deaf kid who's 6 years old, and they're having to deal with the athletic association. They don't want him playing sports because he can't hear. And I
Oh,
grew up on sports. That was my thing. So things like that, just
yeah.
yeah.
It really fuels your passion. And yeah, so thanks so much, you guys. Thanks for those quick introductions. So yeah, let's talk about accessibility. And I'm coming in with what I imagine is sort of an average understanding of what accessibility is sort of in general and why it's important. And I can only say that because I figure I'm probably pretty average. I mean, but if you asked me, like as an L&D professional, what accessibility is and why it's important, I'd probably look at you like I'd seen a ghost, because I would not be able to articulate in a way that anyone could really understand it. And I have a feeling that many other L&D folks are in the same sort of place. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. What does accessibility really mean? So let's start with the basics, right? So what is accessibility? Like when we hear that word, what does that mean?
I'm happy to start. To me, it's the root word. It's about access. In fact, I use that term more than accessibility because for a lot of people, accessibility has baggage. It has preconceived notions. It's, I don't need to do that. I'm not the federal government. But when you reframe the conversation to say, who deserves access to this professional development opportunity? Don't ask a question you don't want the answer to. Don't ask somebody, hey, should we make this work with screen readers? Don't ask that question. Say, hey, should we make sure that everybody in our audience can access this content? And it means doing it in a way that people can use their preferred assistive technology and their preferred adaptive strategies. So no matter what types of situation they find themselves in their life, whether it's a physical condition, whether it's neurological, cognitive, is everybody has an adaptive strategy over something. Maybe it's how you have trouble sleeping at night and you have adaptive strategies to help you get there. So when we put out learning content, there are people who need to implement assistive technology or adaptive strategies. And so accessibility is making sure we're doing our designs so that people can use their preferred methods.
Meryl, you're excited about that. Do you want to, if anything you want to add? Did you want to add anything, Meryl, to what Diane said?
Yes, Dr. Mill. So to write on what Diane said about access, my definition has that in there, is that accessibility gives everyone equal access to products, services, experiences, and workplaces, regardless of their disability, abilities, background, situation, and whatnot. And accessibility is for everyone, and that's the use of closed captions, my thing. 80% of the people who use captions are not deaf or hard of hearing. So that shows you the value of accessibility beyond who it was originally created for. Same thing with curb cuts. They were originally developed for wheelchairs to help them cross the street. These are the ramps at street corners. But guess what? So many people use them. Parents pushing strollers, shoppers pushing cars, skaters, bikers, so many
Yep.
people. So accessibility has the curb cut effect that so many people using.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Eduardo.
Yeah, I think that it's important that we don't encapsulate accessibility with e-learning, with internet or web. It's more than that. It's
Yes.
much, much more than that. And I think what I've seen is that people think, oh, accessibility. Oh, I've first of all, I got to do it. I'm obliged to it. Later on we may talk about that. I'll talk about that. But first of all, based on the question, it's important that it's about equal opportunity, having the opportunity to access information, having the opportunity to be able to have the same level field with everyone else and not feel left out. But not just about websites, not just about technology. So being a person, for 2 years, being a person with disability has opened my eyes to to see that there's not much opportunity. There's, issues, the acceptance. There's a lot of things there, and I think, so not just about technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I
I think
definitely go ahead, Judy. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was saying that I think that if you're a person who doesn't need adaptive strategies beyond what's typical, it may not even be, you may not even realize how frustrating it is. So sometimes I try to relate this to usability, because everybody has had the experience of having an unusable app or website, or public service, or something along those lines. And so at least, the empathy can be drawn from our frustrations with
Mm-hmm.
usability. And I think that there are issues with accessibility and usability as well. I mean, I think that when I worked for Diane, she had a big focus on not just making things to code or to, meet 508 compliance, but actually have usable accessibility. She cared about, people being able to skip things easily if they were using a screen reader, just from a usability perspective. And so sometimes I think those things are really intertwined.
Yeah. I like that a lot. A lot of times, if you think about it as usability versus accessibility, or think of them as synonyms, I think that's fantastic. That's a great way to change your perspective. And I'll tell you, the closed caption things, I immediately, not that anybody could see, but I raised my hand because I actually mentioned this before. I use closed captions like it's a regular. Like if closed captions aren't on, I probably can't hear it because there's too many other things happening. And if I turn it up to where I can hear it, nobody else can hear anything. And I don't have
Mar-
any diagnosed hearing thing. I don't have that, any diagnosed hearing disability, but yeah, I prefer them. And I never thought about the ramps. That's a phenomenal example of how, why wouldn't we do it? So many other people will get use of it. It's not just 3 people that you think are in your organization that will use it. So many other people will. So that's fantastic. That was a great way to kind of discuss and talk about and define what accessibility is. So we know that there are accessibility standards. How do we find out what those are? Because I said standards, and that it made me like, ugh, because I know that means it's complicated and hard to find, probably hard to find. So what can you tell us about that? How do we figure out what that is?
I'm happy to jump in first on all
No,
of them, but
Go
I'll
for
I
it.
run off.
think you should
Go
go
for
ahead.
it. Lead it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about all types of learning. My primary area of knowledge is e-learning, and so for that, the standard is WCAG. Some people call it WCAG. Some people call it WCAG. WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, put out by the W3C. They're basically the folks who run the internet, and they are written, in my opinion, for website developers. And so if you are brand new to this topic and you go, oh, well, let me just go. And you go, there's this quick reference guide. In fact, if you just Google WCAG quick reference guide, if you already know what they are, it's a fantastic site.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have no idea what you are, you're going to okay, I understand that. Oh, huh? Then you click on more information. It starts talking about ASCII codes and everything. So I don't think it's accessible. See what I did there?
Look at that. Yeah.
I don't think it's I don't think it is very accessible from an understanding point of view. I'm sure it meets the WCAG. I'm sure their website is WCAG compliant. And so technologically it can be used with assistive technology, but it is not very easy to understand, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But with the right guidance from somebody who does know how to bridge the gaps between what it says and what we do for a living, it tells us what to do as the base standard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think we need to recognize that it's the minimum. Gotcha. So there are many additional best practices. So, for example, the WCAG standards talks about how you want to use synchronized captions for those who can't hear. But I have learned so much from Meryl. By the way, you have to follow Meryl on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I have learned so much from Meryl about best practices for captions. So the WCAG standards are the minimum. They're and if you're in the federal federal government, it's the government requirement. There's case law that's shifting to where it's going to be more required for everybody. But I'll be honest, it's intimidating to get in there and get started. And that's why I appreciate podcasts like this to help people connect the dots a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also the fact that more intimidating is that e-learning it's more complicated because some things you try to explain to the client that some things cannot be done in e-learning with respect to WCAG. So that adds another more complex thing. And also, we are subject to authoring tools. You cannot do in RISE most things, but you can in Storyline or in Adapt or another. So that's the other thing. So then client sets expectations. And sometimes clients say, well, wait a minute, now that's too many complex. I need it in RISE for budget reason, timeline reason. And they say, oh, you know what? We can make a little bit accessibility, which is not a nice thing. Like, we just gonna add a couple of things there just to comply. But so, so that also has a layer of complexity.
Agreed. Yeah.
And there's not really, that I'm aware of, a corresponding standard for some of the other ways we train. So I don't know of a standard, like a universally accepted standard for everything you might want to do in the classroom.
Right.
Bits and pieces, I know that, as Judy is talking about neurodivergent, she's sharing great tips on how to work with that. I've got a friend over at Gallaudet University, and they very heavily focus on the deaf and hard of hearing. And she has been so helpful for me to help me understand how to work with sign language interpreters as a trainer. I had somebody come into a software training class who needed a sign language interpreter. And I was really worried about that because when I teach software, I assume you can look at my screen while you're hearing my voice. So if I say, do this, you're looking at where it is, or you're looking at your own monitor. Well, if you're using a sign language interpreter, you know what I'm talking about, Meryl. You're looking at your interpreter.
Yeah.
You can't look at your screen while I'm talking, because me talking is you looking. And so I got some guidance from her on how to best manage that scenario, because I don't know of one place to go, hey, you're going to be in the classroom. Here's how you can work well with somebody who's deaf and hard of hearing, and here's how you can work with someone neurodivergent. I wish there was a standard. Maybe there needs to be a standard. Maybe we need to make a standard. I don't know.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
I think that there are some things coming out, like I have mentioned. I'm sorry, I'm breaking the fourth wall a lot. We recorded the second episode yesterday, so we've some of these conversations we've already had. But so I am trying to put out some more information about neurodivergence. I think that also in terms of classroom training and live events, studying universal design and universal design for learning is very helpful, and less about the contrast ratio has to be at least this, but more about principles to follow. And I'm hopeful that as we keep having those conversations and keep focusing on those things, that will make us more inclusive of, things that haven't been talked about as much in the past, like neurodivergence, like motor issues, and mobility and things like that.
I want to attend on to Diane Swing. Absolutely right. One of my favorite projects was reviewing a course on how to make it as accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing. And it was a challenge because some were signers, some were speakers and not signers, some signed in a different language. So it was an adventure to do. But one of the key things I said was, whenever you're showing something on screen, they'll be talking and showing at the same time, because I can't go in two places at once. So thank you for that. And I appreciate that you mentioned the WCAG. Even with my experience, I am still I read and reread and reread one. And I'm like, what is this thing? So I'm very excited about version 3.0 of WCAG, which will have plain language, which is what
Mhm.
everything is supposed to be on for the maximum understanding and absorbing. We all have cognitive days where our cognitive functions are not at their best. I wasn't sleeping well this week and it was messing with my ability to read and concentrate. So even people who are educated prefer plain language. I read a study
Absolutely.
that said the more educated you are, the greater the preference for plain language. And
Mhm.
besides, we have so much content out there. We don't have time to read anything twice. So
That's
make
for
it
sure.
clear on the first read, and we'll understand your messaging better that way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, and of course, Americans with Disabilities Act and the Section 508 of Rehab Act, both they don't spell out what you're supposed to do. So, for example, I mean, there's nothing about digital. It's very basic.
Mm,
So, there are no standards about caption. So, we can't just say you have to have them. You can have it and have terrible caption anyway.
yeah.
So that's where other guys like me and captioning key guy come into play. I mean, you're not going to find rules that say you do that, but what we can do is give you best practices based on our experiences.
Yes.
And of course, as Eduardo said, don't forget accessibility is not just digital. It's everything,
It's everything.
non-digital and digital. That's
Yeah.
what I call 350-degree accessibility. You have
Ooh.
to think about the whole thing. And too many companies flip that. So I might be able to do something online, but I have to go through the drive-through, which is not accessible for me.
Yeah.
So you
Exactly.
need to
Right.
think of the whole picture.
Yes. And does
And that
anybody
and
else
that
feel like that if Merrill had a church, you would go? Like,
Oh yeah.
like, like, just because like you're so dynamic and you have like what you're saying, we're all like, yes, like we're like the church lady, just yes. Okay, I'm sorry.
I
Go ahead,
I
Diane.
have oh
Go
Either
ahead,
one
I'm
of
Judy.
sorry.
you, both
Okay.
of you had something to say.
I have to say, Meryl said something about not just having closed captions, but the quality of them.
Mm-hmm.
I follow Meryl. I read almost everything she writes, or I try to. She has a fantastic video about showing different qualities of like auto captions. And so first of all, it will blow your mind if you've never seen bad auto captions or closed captions done, and you think that just kind of throwing something out there and having them is good enough. It will convince you otherwise.
Mm,
Second, if instructional designers are watching this, just the way she shows things from a concrete perspective and is able to convince you by showing you the difference between good and bad captions, or no captions, I think it's a very interesting instructional design study. Just going to throw that out
okay.
there. Go find it.
Good. Great resource. Go ahead, Diane.
Sorry.
When you were talking about the whole 360-degree, we also need to look at the full learner journey from, can they find your course?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can they register for your course? Can they, do they know who to contact for accommodations? If they did call the number for accommodations, are they routed to 12 people and is it only on the phone? All the way through the evaluation you send out to any post work that's done and pre-work that's being done. So we need to look at the whole intake process and outflow, like all of it needs to be accessible.
Yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead,
Eduardo was
Eduardo.
trying to.
Yeah. Go right
No,
ahead.
something came to mind, not related to accessibility, but and I apologize. I don't mean to offend. When you talk about American,
Yeah.
you're talking about North American, not South American.
Correct.
There's no South American Act or America this one. And so that always came to mind. I was that there is a difference between North America and South American.
Yeah.
Even though we are Americans, there's a huge difference.
Yes. Thank you for
Mhm.
pointing
and
that
and
out.
and further between North America and just the U.S. Like we
Yes.
all know that that U.S. citizens tend to say America and mean just the U.S.
Yes,
I'm glad you
because
actually said that.
we're very self-centered, and I don't mean that in like the meanest way. It's just how we are. Is we don't think much outside of our borders. So I may have lost a few listeners when I just said that, but that's fine. They'll be back. Well, I think that's really great information, and I appreciate that you did everything, including like giving us specifically where to go, and then what it sounds like to me is that we've got some guidelines, we've got some rules, and I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me, but really we need to come up with, just like you said, what are our own best practices, and maybe because we'll have somebody who asks proven best practices over time, and then build that into our design process, because this has to happen, just like you said, Diane, from the very beginning. This isn't like when we're all done, we do an accessibility review and basically have to rebuild three quarters of it because we didn't do it right the first time.
Yeah. Only wait till the end if you don't like your money.
Oh yeah, if you like flushing it down the toilet, makes sense to me.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So okay, so then whose responsibility is accessibility? Like, who's responsible for it?
Everyone, everybody's, and
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, developers or no graphic designer, and no. Everybody's responsible. Why?
Everyone.
Because it's a human thing to do. Is to care.
I'm going to say specifically an audience that we often leave out, which is the strategic level, the leadership level, because you were just mentioning how often, I think, and Eduardo was just saying, accessibility stuff is deprioritized because it's more expensive, because it might cause us to use a different tool with longer production times. So there are costs to accessibility, and therefore it has to be considered at the strategic level. In episode 2, we will talk about how. Sorry. We were having a conversation about how sometimes accessibility concerns dictate which modality you might use in a learning experience, which if we expand that out, it might be more like, are you going to use an app versus a website? Or is this going to be, an in-person event versus a virtual event, or, something like that. Accessibility concerns might contribute to those considerations. So it really has to be considered at the strategic level. That's all I have to say about that.
No, I think your ad is perfect because Eduardo said everyone, and you said it starts at the top.
Yep.
And it does. It starts at the top. Yeah.
And let's be really clear. It costs more money. It takes time. I cannot. Now, I think it doesn't have to be as hard as a lot of people think. And if you bake it in from the beginning and you're well trained, it doesn't have to be huge.
Yes.
But it's not zero.
It's not zero.
No, it's much cheaper when you do them from the beginning. I mean, my son's friends make cupcakes, and they were terrible. They left out the tiniest of ingredients, 1 teaspoon of salt. And now, you can sprinkle them on the cupcake, but it's got to be uneven. You're going to have the top, it's going to get the biggest, dirtiest bite. It's going to be awful. So when you bake it the only way to fix it is to start over. But that means you have to buy the ingredients again and bake it all over again. But if you do it from the start correctly, you check your recipe, your processes, and then it'll be better that way.
Absolutely.
So, accessibility is everyone's responsibility, but the companies that are doing it well have 2 things in common. One, it starts at the top, just like Judy said, because if there's nobody pushing that, it's going to be very hard to do it and then second, and that at the top, there should be a deputy or an assistant or somebody who's the backup. Because if that person leaves the company, they take accessibility with them and then nobody cares. So you always have that backup. And the second thing is training. The entire organization should go through accessibility and disability awareness training. Because when everybody gets it, then they understand.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And if it's everyone's responsibility, who hired all those people, it should start at the top.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's important to provide training and provide processes to support that.
Yeah.
Because in terms of having checkpoints, the planning, checkpoints in your project plan, checkpoints that says, for example, when you start a project, the first thing you need to do, get all the team in one room and say, okay, does everybody know about accessibility? And if somebody says, no, I don't, then okay, work with that person. And obviously, leadership must have a mission, a statement about accessibility, because we have to be coherent. We have to be consistent in the sense that, okay, leadership wants this in terms of accessibility. Okay, then what we do, what we produce, is has to be in line to what they want. So everybody don't get mixed messages.
Right.
Now, they told us that we have to do this cheaply, but they want accessibility. Hell no, that doesn't work. So I think we need to provide the necessary tools for, and not assume that an instructional designer knows about accessibility, a DP, graphic designer, creative director knows about it. Now we have to put process in places and tools in places like checklists, like best practices, so that we set the team up for success.
Yes. Yes, and there needs to be a strategy. It's not just Judy. I like that. Just Judy on the team working on accessibility, trying to, check and say, okay, what project are you working on? Let me take a peek at it. Let me see if it's accessible. No. It has to be an overarching strategy. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yes, I feel like very strongly we should be doing this, but we're not doing anything. You got to make a strategy, right? And that starts at the top, and it has to be, for lack of a better word, enforced. People have to be held accountable. It has to be written into, this is the way that we do things. And so I can see that that's why, that kind of leads us really nicely to the next question, why a lot of folks just don't do anything. Because it's a thing. It's a process. It's not just we hit a button and now it's accessible. I think many folks in L&D especially are waiting for all of the tools to have a magic button that you push, that it then pops up with errors and says everything. That's not, guys, that's not coming.
Yeah.
You're
Are you
waiting
sure?
for something no, it's not coming. You're waiting for something that's never coming, because those companies don't have to do that. And just like you don't want to spend the time and the money, they're not going to spend the time and the money. And like you said, sometimes things change in this area. So until it's black and white, A, B, C, D linear, those companies are not going to adopt that. So what you're waiting for is never going to come.
Yeah,
It's like a Linus waiting for the great pumpkin, right? On
and
Halloween night. You'll see, Charlie Brown. Next year, you'll see Linus, nobody's coming.
I
Right?
mean,
That's what I'm trying to tell you. Go ahead, Eduardo.
there's two types of companies: those ones that know it is coming and prepare themselves,
Yeah.
and the ones that don't do it basically are waiting to lose clients, to lose money, to come to a point where they are not, they don't have any more clients, because they don't have that. So
Yep.
I think, there are companies that are proactive, but there are companies also that are reactive. They're not
Yes.
going to do anything until it gets to a
Till they
point
have
where,
to.
yeah, they're going, oh shoot, we have to, and
Right.
sometimes it could be too late.
Yep. Could be too late.
I think the tools are a barrier. I think the money and the time is a barrier for a lot of people, but for many organizations, it's bigger than that. It's, oh, we don't have anybody with disabilities in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, A, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
B, if you don't, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what other barriers do you have in your organization that's keeping you from hiring somebody with a disability? And C, if they don't now, they will. I was speaking with somebody who works in accessibility at Procter & Gamble, and he just said something that hit me in the gut. All ability is temporary.
Mm.
And it is. So even if you don't have a disability today, you might. So, like, so many things wrong with that statement. There you go, Eduardo. So many things wrong with that statement. And the other big one is, well, somebody with X condition couldn't do this job.
Yeah.
Like, as an instructional designer, apparently I have the power to decide what somebody can and can't accomplish in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get to decide that as an instructional designer. No, I don't. So I can't choose that somebody can't do a certain job. Now, are there a few jobs that are rated formally by a legal professional and perhaps a vocational rehabilitation person to act, a Navy pilot? Okay, a Navy pilot right now needs to have vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if that pilot is on, disability leave and is having cataract surgery soon? Well, by golly, isn't now the best time for him to take his required training while he can't fly? So many, I think, organizations have those two mental barriers
Yeah.
that won't even let them go down the road and figure out some of the other things.
So let's ask the question that I've been dying to ask, and that is, what if we just don't? Right? So what if we just don't do anything to make our learning solutions, websites, our lives accessible? And I ask this because I really believe that most people are just not doing anything about it. What's the impact? What happens?
Is anybody here a Pink Floyd fan?
Sure.
Any Pink Floyd fans? Okay,
Sure.
There's a song. There's a line from a song. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you are not choosing to include, you are choosing to exclude.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Very good. So, I mean, if I was going to take a class, what's the first thing I'm going to look for? If it's an online class and it's got video, I'm going to
Yeah.
look for captions. If you don't have it, I'm not taking your class. I'm going somewhere else. So you miss out on those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you have a target audience and they have enough money to buy 13,000 boxes of cookies for everybody in the U.S., you get a box, 13,000 boxes of cookies, you get 13 boxes. Would you want their money? Would you want their money if they can afford it? Well, guess what? The target audience consisted of people with disabilities and those supporters. That's how much money they have in disposable income that companies are missing out by not choosing to be proactive. And besides, it's not just 1 in every 4 person or 5, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, depends who you ask, who has a disability. That doesn't, like Diane said, it doesn't consider the temporary, but there's also situational and episodic impairment. So when I broke my thumb and I had to have surgery, I couldn't use the keyboard like I normally do. So I had a temporary impairment in my hand. And besides, the report showed out of 10 companies are investing in digital accessibility. So your competitors are going to be in that group.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And it's
right.
not just competitors for customers, it's competitors for talent, for recruiting. The Great Resignation, people are having trouble finding employees. So are you just going to exclude part of your recruiting pool?
Right. What else will happen, Judy or Eduardo?
I think about this from the opposite perspective too, which I know we've already done a lot of arguing for usability or accessibility. I'm thinking about usability in the same vein because there's a documentary called Objectified. I pull this out whenever we talk about accessibility or usability. OXO, it's about product design. And we all know the company OXO that makes all the really cool kitchen stuff. Usually it's very usable, it's very easy to use. One of their biggest successes is the vegetable peeler, like the rubberized vegetable peeler. Before that, the vegetable peelers were almost wholly, very difficult to use, very difficult to hold on to. They started by saying, okay, we want to make a vegetable peeler that you could use if you're a child, you could use if you're an old person with arthritis, whatever. They started out by trying to make something that was more accessible. And what they ended up doing for like these different ends of a spectrum, and what they ended up making was something that was so much more usable for the entire population that this was one of their big money makers. And I love that story about how sometimes accessibility and usability interplay. And in trying to make something that meets 508 guidelines or whatever, you also make something that, like Meryl was saying, that parents can use while they're, pushing their kids in a stroller.
Definitely.
I believe that it depends which perspective you look at. If you look at a company that is developing e-learning and you don't do anything, you're going to lose clients. You're going to lose out in business. If you look at it through a perspective of a company who doesn't care about e-learning accessibility, in the case of North America, you got laws. You get fined. And in fact, and so you're in trouble. If you don't do nothing, something external is going to happen to make you do something. But for me, hopefully that's not the case, because it's a human thing to care about others.
Yeah.
A human thing to include accessibility, not because you are forced to do it.
If I'm an instructional designer, e-learning, classroom, whatever, if I don't take accessibility into account, I'm deciding who has the right to get better at their jobs.
Yeah.
I shouldn't make that decision.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'd go to Diane's church too. I don't know. It's pretty powerful stuff, and I love that. Thank you for laughing at my joke, but it's true. Cause you guys talking like all of us are just, because it's just like Eduardo said, it's very human for us to care. And I think that those listening, there's probably a good portion of people listening that don't know the impact. They don't understand why it's so important, other than that 508 says we're supposed to, or my boss said we have to. They don't really understand. So you have to be able to internalize that in order to have that caring about this particular part, right? So
and I think one of the best ways that you can educate yourself is, yes, you need to know the do's and don'ts. But I think the more you can understand the specific impact to the person, the more motivated you're going to be, the better choices you're going to make. Because there's a lot of things where I love it when we have a client who goes through formal accessibility testing. So we have our own internal accessibility testers. Sometimes the client has their own. Sometimes it's a technical team. Sometimes it's users, people who use assistive technology in their daily lives. I love it when I get to sit in and hear them talk through the impact. I learn so much. So for example, alt text is one of the things that you do for someone who can't see. If you have an image or a button, behind the scenes, you put in information so that a screen reader can read to them what that picture is or what that button is. And so imagine you're in an e-learning course and you click on a button and a little check mark appears so you know which ones you've clicked on or not. Well, to someone using a screen reader, they deserve that same information.
Yeah.
And so we add a little word that says visited. And so what we would do is something like download PDF visited. Well, what we learned is put the word visited first, because people who use a screen reader, they might not listen to the whole thing. And they'll be like, oh, I've already been on that. I mean, that's a really super detailed technical example, but it's a perspective about the human and talking to that human being and what causes them grief and how do they interact with their assistive technology. So the more you can learn about, hey, in this classroom, that flickering fluorescent light annoys me. But if you give somebody else a migraine or nausea, or can just totally prevent them from paying any attention whatsoever, like they're done for the day.
Right.
If I don't know that and I'm the instructor, I'll go, oh, well, at the end of the day, I'll be sure to let them know. Oh, and then I forgot because I have to catch a flight.
Yep.
As opposed to now that I know that that's an impact to real people in real ways. Like if I show up in the morning, I'm going to be like, chop, chop, who's going to fix that light?
Yeah.
Or can you get us another room? So you've got to understand not just the guidelines, but the people and what are they going to deal with? Because most people out there care about other people. Not everybody.
Not
Most
everybody,
people.
but yeah, most people.
Yeah.
And when you know their stories, you're going to be more committed to doing the right thing. And it's going to be easier to remember. We remember stories. I'm going to always remember that fluorescent light. But if I had just read it on a checklist, I'd probably forget.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
One of my favorite stories is, okay, you know how people say nobody has a disability in my organization, right? We hear that all the time. My favorite story came from a friend of mine. She was working with a guy on his website, and he liked the colors, and she said those are not accessible colors because the contrast issues and so forth. And the guy was their partner in the company, and she said, well, let's go take this around to other employees and show them. Well, they went into his partner's office, and his partner said, don't bother showing me, I'm colorblind. His own partner had a disability, and he didn't know it.
I didn't even know it. Yep.
Wow.
And that impacts his experience with anything, with any kind of color, right? And everything in life. So, yeah. I'll tell you what, you guys have convinced me, that's for sure. Hopefully other folks that are listening have been convinced.
Million to go.
One down, a million to go. Exactly. So what should we do then? I mean, folks, especially folks listening to this, they're like, okay, fine. You know what? I'm very convinced. I'm motivated. I feel compelled to do this. What should we do? What's a good first step towards, I don't know, just being aware or adding accessibility to the next thing that we create?
Can I say something before
Yeah.
we put ourselves in different scenarios? Because it's a different scenario for a company who has
Sure.
a person with disability, for instructional designer, for a e-learning company. So I think those are different scenarios.
Sure. So that's a great idea. So let's say, what's the first thing we could do as an organization, as a member of the learning team, even as a learner? We'll go with those three. What would you say?
I'll go tactical this time. Sometimes I like to go strategic. Sometimes I like to go tactical. I think you can do both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's 3 things you can do tomorrow for everything you create here going forward. You don't need executive support. You don't need good color contrast, closed captions. And if you're doing e-learning, make your buttons bigger. Like none of those are hard. Yes, there are best practices on captions, but any captions are better than 0 captions. Like those are things you can do. I don't know what day you're listening to it. So the next business day, just do it. Just start somewhere while you're working on figuring everything else out.
Yeah.
I will I'm going to go ahead and shove myself in so that I make sure that nobody else says mine. Do something to improve your empathy. Like we've talked about how it matters a lot more once it gets personal, once it affects you or affects somebody else. Here's an easy thing that most of the population could do to see something in a different perspective. Most of the population is not colorblind. A large percentage of the population actually is. There are percentages, but most people aren't. So if you're not colorblind, go look at a couple of websites. There are websites that you can go to that will simulate colorblindness for you. And so you could upload pictures that you took. I took a picture once at the Portland airport that has a garage with red and green lights to indicate whether parking spots are available. I took a picture and put it through one of these simulators and sent it to them to show them how inaccessible that was for people with colorblindness. Anyway, go look at something that you've created, websites that you go to, pictures that you've taken, and just simulate color blindness for yourself as a starting point to get that empathy.
Great. That's a great idea.
And if I could tack on to Judy's there, try doing something, book an airline ticket, do something, and just put your mouse away.
Oh,
Try to do it with
yes.
nothing other than a standard keyboard using space, tab, arrow. See how that works.
Okay.
Yep.
Then try your e-learning course.
Another one is to turn off, have a video call, turn off the sound, turn off your speakers, and turn on the caption and see how well you follow each other, because it's going to be a mess. I promise you. So these are great empathy exercises. And one time I was talking to a friend who was blind, and he had to take a phone call. And it was an amazing experience to watch him on the phone, because he was looking with his phone, he was looking things up. Guess what? His phone was blank. So it just blew my mind watching him interact with it and being able to do what he needed to do, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So I know accessibility sounds overwhelming. It's like facing a huge pile of dishes and you just don't know where to start. You can't decide. So when I talk to people new to accessibility, the first thing I tell them is think progress over perfection.
Love
So
that.
feel like it's all or nothing. Not. Just take one small step, like Judy said, and Diane said, to caption, to add image descriptions, whatever. Just start small and whatever you specialize in. So if you're an instructor, maybe you can caption your video.
All right,
Go to
Eduardo.
Coursera and take a course on Introduction to Accessibility and Inclusive Design. That's where I started. There were some things that were technical, but the way I started, and I started 2 years ago, was taking courses. And I took various courses in Coursera. There's one about universal design too. And I think that because first there has to be an internal process that you want to learn, you want to do it, you want to learn more about it, you want to involved in accessibility, has to start with internally with you. And once you have that, then the next step for me was to go out and take courses on it.
Yeah.
And I
Great.
found a couple of good ones in Coursera.
Okay.
And that's how I start
Nice.
building on that.
All great first steps. Thank you guys so much for that. Okay, 2 quick questions as we wrap up. These ones are not about accessibility, but I am so grateful for everything that you guys have shared. So the first question is, what is your best piece of life advice?
Can I go?
Go ahead.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, a couple of them. Take time to know yourself. Use adversity as an opportunity, and practice gratitude and affirmations.
I love it. I love all of them. And everyone else is like, I got nothing left. Like that was, how do you beat that? That's fantastic. How about you, Meryl? What's your best piece of life advice?
Well, you just never know who you will meet, whether they're a deaf person or someone who can't understand you because they don't speak your language. I remember as a teenager, I was in a dressing room, and my mom was out in the store shopping. And then when I got finished, I opened my door to see my mom and the salesperson talking to each other and laughing. And I found out that the salesperson was trying to talk to me through the door while I was
Oh.
trying on. I had no idea. So, and she admitted that she thought I was a snob because I was not answering her. So I think it's a powerful lesson. We've got to let go of assumption. We
Yeah.
need to let go that all deafblind people have absolutely no sight and no hearing. That's not true. So all over the place, I've met people who have different varying levels of blindness. You meet deaf people who sign, deaf people who don't, deaf people who lip read, deaf people who don't. Well, all of it, it's a spectrum.
Mhm.
Disabilities are a spectrum. They're not in neat little packages. So you just never know. So be careful with those assumptions. Try not to make them. And the biggest one, communication is huge in our room. And we always tend to default to one mode of communication, which is talking or a phone call. So we need to get in the habit of having a second way of communicating available at all times. And guess what?
Mhm.
We all have one.
We sure do. It lights up blue and it
Um,
makes me happy. Yeah. It's my best friend right here. It's my best friend. Too many messages from my best friend right now. Yep, exactly. Meryl's petting her phone. Exactly.
All right, I'm not going to try to go deep. If something feels wrong, hydrate first.
Oh,
That's it for today.
you know what though? That's the truth. If
Since I'm drinking soda today instead of
nothing-
instead of hydrating myself.
Yeah, drink water. Exactly. How about you, Diane?
I would say find your influence. We all have ways that we can influence other people, whether it's a friend and we help them get out of a funk, or
Mhm.
whether it's advocating for something at work. Is we all have more influence than we necessarily know. And so find your place, find your influence, find where you are going to make a big difference.
It's great.
That.
All right. Last question. Where can people find you if they want to after the show?
I don't want to.
Oh, Eduardo's like, I'm unavailable. No.
No, sorry. No.
No wonder you're the only person here I haven't talked to before today, or haven't messaged with, or something before today.
All right, Judy, you start.
LinkedIn, I'm super easy to find, and I love messaging with people and getting to know people. It beats working.
It does. That's for sure. How about you, Diane?
LinkedIn also is my social media drug of choice. And also, am I allowed to do a shameless plug?
Do it.
I am so excited that my coworker Amy and I will be delivering a pre-conference workshop at Training 2023, one day on accessibility.
Ooh.
Nice.
As far as I am aware of the big, ATD Learning Guild, Training Mag, some of the big ones in our industry, I think this is the first conference to offer a pre-conference workshop on accessibility.
I think you're right.
Kudos to them for making it a priority. I'm super excited about it, so you can find me there.
All right. Excellent. How about you, Meryl?
Meryl.net, my name. If you do a search for Meryl, you'll either find Meryl Streep, but if we take her out of the picture, I think you can find me. And on LinkedIn is definitely my social media drug of choice. I'm
Okay.
with Diane on that.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, Eduardo. What if somebody wants to talk to you? Come on, you got to give them something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use much LinkedIn, but I can give my email. Is that okay?
Sure, that'd be great.
It's eduardo.escalante@sweetrush.com.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank
I'm
you
going to
so
start
much.
bugging you with emails now, Eduardo.
Yes. Yeah. Judy's she's sending you
I
one
won't
right
answer.
now. He's like, delete.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, my bad.
Oh, my bad.
Out of
Accidentally hit block.
forever.
Yeah. Forever. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Meryl Evans, Eduardo Escalante, Diane Elkins, and Judy Katz for sharing your thoughts today. Thanks to the listeners for hanging out with us. And don't forget to tell your friends and watch for another episode of the If You Ask Betty podcast soon. Peace out.